Hello and welcome. We appreciate all of you joining us for this afternoon's corrections webinar. My name is Melissa Hultstrand, and I'm one of the leaders in our service to correctional institutions across the United States, which includes planning and leading our GED Corrections Forum, as well as the corrections track at our annual conference. We know how hard it is to access professional development during these challenging times, especially for those who work in corrections. So with the help of our Corrections Forum members, we brainstormed and lined up a few sessions for you. Please note that this session will be recorded, and the recording, as well as yesterday's, will be available on our website next week. We have already posted the link you should go to access the recordings and certificates for all of you to see in the chat box. And if you are having issues with audio right now, please note you should click on audio, which you will see on the right-hand side of your screen, and then call into the number listed, or you can reboot. Now, I would like to introduce our presenter. Our presenter, Penny Heddlefeld, taught 10 years in public school and then moved on to the North Dakota Youth Correctional Center in 2004, where she served as the read-write trainer for all DOCR facilities. In 2011, Penny received her master's in education leadership from the University of North Dakota, where she then assumed the role of principal of schools for the North Dakota Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. In 2013, Penny assumed the role of Director of Education for the ND-DOCR, as well as graduated with her doctorate from the University of South Dakota in Education Administration. In 2018, Penny was assigned the oversight of the Departments of Professional Development and Core Correctional Practices, as well as continuing as Director of Education. Now, without further ado, here is our presenter, Penny Heddlefeld.
Good afternoon. I'm not able to see a correction page, so are you seeing my name and my picture on your screen, Melissa?
Yes, you just need to go into slideshow mode.
Okay, I think I might actually leave it off that mode because I'm going to be opening several different things.
Oh.
But
sure,
if you
no problem.
chat communication with your folks that it's a little bit too small and I need to make it bigger, I sure will.
Okay,
so
that looks great.
Okay, great. Thanks for the introduction, and I look forward to having a visit with you this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came to be, but I want to also talk about some of the reform that we did, the policy pieces, and then where we currently are at. Within the North Dakota Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So when I say transformation, I really think that it was probably a shift in paradigm, but there was a lot of infrastructure that took place within that time. As Melissa had shared with you, in 2010, I became an administrator within the Department of Corrections, and in 2013, I became the director. And at that time, we were looking at some non-refundables at about 72%. So our non-refundables within the NRS scales of GED testing services, our state is a GED only testing state. That was not good enough numbers for us. We had high non-compliance write-out rate where folks were written out and then they were never brought back in. We utilized a lot of volunteers to deliver main educational services, and so volunteers are voluntary both in time and receiving no payments. And so the sense of urgency varied depending on what, of course, was going on in most of the time their retired life, and no consistency amongst the folks. In addition to that, the students that they were serving we're on waiting lists most of the time because a lot of times those volunteers preferred to tutor and work with them one-to-one or about 4-to-1. At that time, we're dating ourselves within the GED world of OPTs, but we used OPTs for our initial assessment. So that was what the teachers were going off of. They would just automatically give them the paper pencil test of the official practice test to see where they were at. There was some significant issues with that, of course, because as you take a look at the official practice tests and you have somebody significantly bomb it, we've now decreased their likelihood and their will, even their intent and their confidence to be able to successfully finish that set of testing to be a GED graduate. At the time, we had 9 faculty serving 3 sites. So we had 9 faculty in 2010 serving the North Dakota State Penitentiary, our maximum, our James River Correctional Center, which is our medium, and Missouri River Correctional Center, which is our minimum. At the time, their biggest success story was a 9-year graduate where they talked about all the times that he didn't believe, but they kept working and he kept coming, and it took 9 years to have that person finish the graduation line. Now, don't get me wrong, his name is Jesse, and I'm very pleased that Jesse graduated. He's still with us, and he had some significant learning difficulties, but the system in which the teachers were placed in and that I had inherited amongst the Department of Corrections, we didn't have any infrastructure in place and strategies to be able to really assess people where they were at to get them where they needed to be in an efficient way. So for me, that 9-year graduate was really 8 years of the village, probably missing some things along the way to help him be successful. So from 2011 to 2019, I felt that 2020 probably needed its own slide because I have some words for 2020. But if we take a look at 2011 to 2019, there was a lot of things that took place. In 2010, coming into February of 2011, we implemented the Read Write program. It's an interactive constructivist method of reading that re-networks the brain and how we read. A lot of times the folks that have reading issues have created symptoms within their reading neural network. And so that program came into be. We trained a trainer so that we could have certified tutors in all of our sites. We also restructured the organizational chart to replicate a school. So this was the first time that education had been supervised by educators, trained to be principals and superintendents instead of the business of Rough Rider Industries. So our North Dakota Industries was the supervisor of the education department. So now folks were able to have professional development that was teacher specific. We really began speaking towards a sense of urgency within that programming so that that 9-year success story was really trying to get folks as quickly as possible, as most efficiently as possible to the finish line. The other piece of that within the finish line part is, as many of you would probably acknowledge in your own experiences, we all are pretty likable people within those classroom settings, and a lot of times the most positive and exceptional adults that folks have had a chance to work with. And so some of them weren't really in a hurry, so to speak, to get out of education. And we wanted them to be successful within education, but we also wanted them to get out as efficiently as they got in, because we had more people coming that needed educational services. And more importantly, we wanted them then to be able to explore some vocational opportunities, job opportunities, post-secondary, and whatnot. So we wanted them to also feel a sense of urgency to get finished. We trained way more GED examiners and added a tester assessor at each site. This was huge. Our teachers were doing the very best they can. I have some exceptional teachers on the faculty, and it's really through all of their dedication and hard work that North Dakota has the statistics that they do. And having more trained GED examiners and the testers and assessors made for when folks were having great days, have been working well, and all things were good. The home life, like for kids, for instance, at the Youth Correctional Center, sometimes they get poor news, and if they were set to test that day, that makes for a not very successful set of testing, right? And so having a GED examiner on site was able to allow us to have testing when we were able to schedule it amongst the GED examination system itself, but not having to wait for somebody to get there. And sometimes people would have to wait 2 to 3 weeks for their students to get tested because we had a traveler GED examiner. And then probably the biggest thing that I get the most questions on from my colleagues nationally, and is the conversation nationally amongst my cohort, is how we confronted policy within technology. We really began with the computer-based testing of 2014, so thank you GED Testing Services for really starting to push that computer-based testing, because with that, we used that as our conversation talking piece, and we pushed to get all of our a lot of our textbooks that we used were online subscriptions at that point, And we talked about how our efficiencies within some of our consumable costs would also be delineated if we went to internet-based learning and capabilities. So with that, in the computer-based testing era, we pushed policy. I actually wrote it, and then we fine-toothed it and presented it with the devices themselves. But at that point, we launched one-to-one devices capability and expanded iPads within the facilities, which also meant that we had Wi-Fi access points and full internet wiring. It was almost unheard of. There was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of heartburn from those pieces. And so I really have to salute the faculty within the North Dakota Department of Corrections Rehabilitation, because they truly embraced the responsibility that it took. They truly embraced that. They knew that it was a privilege, and so they protected that proximity didn't get missed so that we had a bad offense, right? But in the same talking points, I talked specifically that whenever we give people privilege, there's sometimes going to be some hiccups and some roadblocks along the way because of their poor choices. Otherwise, frankly, we wouldn't be employed as correctional professionals. And so, so far, so good, knock on wood. That really was the push for our wireless devices and wireless within all of our education facilities. Now we've expanded. We still have the iPads. We are rolling out Securus tablets for Ashland University and some of our post-secondary offerings. But it really was when computer-based testing started to get pushed. We also had to really remodel the workspaces and make them resemble schools. In one of our facilities at the medium facility, they had little offices that were separate than the classroom. And so if the phone rang, you didn't know if it was a kiddo from your own kiddo from the school calling to say they have a tummy ache, or the warden asking for a particular thing. But either way, they had to leave their classroom unsupervised to head into that office for the phone and then to come back. So we started knocking out walls. We created and added a constructional ed program that we hadn't had before. And that construction ed teacher is phenomenal. And he prepped the residents to know how to do those things, and they had to knock out walls. As they did that, they learned that some of the walls and the floors were different heights because it was an older building. So then they had to adjust the floors, etc., to make classrooms and offices be one dwelling. At that point, we were very fortunate to hire 2 individuals in 2 different openings that we had that had extensive ELL services in master's degrees and experience. And they've been phenomenal in resources and brainstorming. Ironically, we don't have a lot of ELL folks that need our services, but it's starting to increase. And I'm very thankful that we have 2 very qualified people on our staff that are able to do that. And then we had to start looking at what our biggest resource was. At the time in 2011 to probably about 2017, I had as many teachers at the Youth Correctional Center as I had at the Division of Adult Services, which meant that they were actually teaching way less students, but it was because the Youth Correctional Center is an accredited elementary, middle, and high school. So we started looking at the residents that were getting incarcerated at the adult facilities, and we started to look at those that were under the age of 21. And almost always, some of those folks had some sort of an IEP that was existing out there, and or transcriptionally, life took over and they left high school only needing a credit or 2 or 3. And so in those cases, we began to offer the high school diploma option at our adult facilities if that was a beneficial part, especially to some that had significant learning disabilities, because we could do a bit more modification than what is allowed within accommodations within GED testing services rather than the public schools IEP accommodations. So we offered a high school diploma for adults under the age of 21. For those of you that are curious, though, probably in this decade's time frame that we're talking about here, I would guess that we have probably only about 24 high school diploma earners versus those that chose the GED track. So what else took place? Well, there was a lot that started to take place within our agency as a whole. The good neighbor concept came to be. Our former director, our director Leanne Birch, left our agency the 1st of August. She was headhunted to a different position in Salt Lake City, Utah. So we have an interim director now, but she took a great deal of time to be part of exchange programs, and she was very active as the president of ASCA. And it really got us on the map of the resources and knowing what was out there and what was available to us. And so what took place there is we were able to implement effective communication motivational strategies, MANT, and a humanity focus. And so effective communication is really motivational interviewing, if you've heard of that. And MANT is a positive rapport and positive relationship building within the workplace. The MANT system is what is the behavioral model for the Youth Correctional Center and the Division of Juvenile Services. The Division of Adult Services began more of a humanity focus, and with that humanity focus, it then led to core correctional practices, which is now our behavioral model within the North Dakota Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I supervise the director of the Core Correctional Practices Department, as well as I have the Staff Development and Training Department as part of my responsibility, along with education in the North Dakota Department of Corrections. So sometimes I overlap some of the culture pieces because I feel like it goes with that within the whole of how some of these changes came to be within the transformation. Within that minding of the cultural gap and creating the humanity focus, the core correctional practices and the ECMS groups actually had mandated practice, and we started with 1 hour weekly practices, and it didn't matter what your job was. It could be physical plant, it could be food services, it could be an educator, it could be a case manager, a chief of security, and you all could be in one group. The really cool thing about that is that it really started to open up relationships and knowing who was who. It soon was hard to sustain in that amount of frequency and the coverage that it took when all of those groups needed to meet. And so unfortunately, it didn't get sustained, but I will say that some of the folks in those original groups are still very tight knit, and it's something to take a look more closely at as we move forward. The Department of Corrections, just on an aside, is currently working on leadership training for those that aspire to promote into leadership roles, as well as those newly promoted, so that we could start to build some of that networking again. Because a lot of times, you know, folks have some natural leadership and we offer them a working title change, a bump in pay, and frankly, a lot of times we fit them with floaties and hope for the best. So that's really what was taking place within the corrections at that time. We also started instructional coaches academies. We had some accountability, as well as starting to share some shout outs. As educators, you all know that we're really pleased, and we will talk ad nauseum for hours and hours and hours about that one student that made the connection, that one student that had those successes. But a lot of times we don't spend enough time supporting and building our own self-image with what it is that we do within the programming. And so we created monthly reports, and sometimes that still feels like work at the end of the month for folks, but it was really an opportunity for them to showcase the things that they were doing in their classroom. And it's to tell the story, it's to tell the why of what is happening within the classrooms. When we tell the why of what students are learning, then when security is walking by in the penitentiary and one of our teachers is doing a science experiment, because yes, we're allowed to, then it's not, well, they're just playing around with new toys again, right? It's really an understanding because they follow what it is that we're sharing with them. It was another opportunity to start to bridge the gaps of understanding about what it was that we were working towards. And then we had to really look at our data. Back to Jesse, in 9 years to get to the victory line, we needed to look at what is it that we needed to do to figure out where we put students. And so we had to understand and depend on assessments, and we started to look at what kind of local assessments could we do to really know where our students were so we could meet them where they were coming in at to get them to the finish line of graduation. So we started peer classes, and this was a little rough at first, to be honest, because our enrollments were pretty high. Of course, with COVID and the pandemic numbers, our enrollments are at a pretty steady pace because we are limiting admissions and discharges because of safety. But at the time, our enrollments were as high as they'd ever been. And so peer classes took a lot of strategic planning. But I told you that the faculty are amazing in North Dakota. And so they had a stick-to-itness. And if I had to liken them to anything, I would say that when it's something they feel strongly about, they're like dogs catching frisbees, right? They're not going to let it go, which is pretty awesome. And so with peer classes, we started to actually do a couple of things. We had a scheduling meeting that took place every Friday. So we put time on the master calendar, which was them literally going over where students were and what their needs were for the next week. And we started to level our classes. So we had a level 1, 2, and 3, for instance, of math, to give you an example of peer classes, so that all people that were in level 1 and or a bubble of level 2 would be in that type of class. And we would start to have some consistencies then within what the teachers were teaching. In addition to that, our movement is pretty frequent between one facility to the next. So if somebody, our average sentence right now is 3.2 years, and you might move a couple of times during that time frame. And so you might move from the maximum to the medium, or the medium to the minimum, to get ready for discharging into the community. And so the peer classes were really the first steps of really starting to see some success and return on our investment of the heavy lift to start to transform our infrastructure, because it allowed teachers to start to see and identify students plateauing more quickly. When you had so many students in your classes and they were all at different areas and different levels, it was really difficult for teachers to be able to pick up as quickly as they would like. And the data driving of this piece made a lot of sense. I have it later in my slides too, but I'll just say here, one of the other things we did is we have one teacher on our faculty that is exceptionally driven in data and is good at it. And so in addition to that, we also had some time set aside, and at one point with as many students as we had right away, we actually put it as a comp time. And now with students being less, it's just part of her regular duties, but she would monitor and offer out data healthy checks a couple times a month or once a month. And that made a huge difference. I told you at the beginning that we had 72% non-refundables, and Emma is her name, and Emma did a great job of starting to put those things out there so that we could start to look at it on a case-by-case, facility-by-facility basis. The other thing within all of this is, when I told you that originally they were supervised by the business of industries, they had never once fully been told or explained what non-refundables mean and what it looks like and how they even become that. And so some of those conversations happened about at that same time. Mentoring, we started a mentoring program. We have a mentoring workbook. We now are fortunate that we took the read-write trainer. That's a full-time read-write trainer. And we also have him, he was trained in instructional coaching and just received his master's in andragogy. And now he's creating and running the mentoring program for all new teachers. And then when we have no new teachers, he's creating some connection corners and offering some PD to our existing teachers as well, to keep people fresh into what we're starting to see as patterns within that leading and learning within the folks. We have leadership teacher teams. And so what we do with those is there's teacher representatives from all the facilities, and they get together and meet and discuss items that they're starting to see as patterns, successes, concerns, and then we do best practices days. And so the leadership team actually plans the best practices days, where once about every 2 weeks or a quarter, depending on what's going on within the agency, all of the teachers within the adult side will get together and they will have a particular agenda set up at best practices. Maybe they'll be teaching a new lesson to each other that they had tried and had great success with. Maybe they'll show a different piece within the data. It's always driven by the needs of the co-workers themselves, the colleagues. And through that, they really started to build and develop into a very tight-knit group. And we actually had some sustainability then at that point within training and being able to affirm people's efforts. So before I get to 2020, I'm not seeing any questions. Do you see any questions, Melissa?
This is CT, sorry. Melissa's not able to see the questions. I just had a couple comments. They were asking if there's any way to do this slideshow version or bump up the font a little bit. And that's about the only questions.
Sure, okay.
I did have one question. How many facilities are in the North Dakota system? And is the instructional coach utilized system-wide?
Yeah, the instructional coach is utilized system-wide. There are 4 different facilities that are state-run. So there's the North Dakota State Penitentiary, that's the maximum facility, James River Correctional Center, which is the medium, and Missouri River Correctional Center, which is the minimum men's adult facilities. Then we have the Youth Correctional Center, which is actually co-ed. By our century code, they can be as young as age 12, and they need to leave before their 21st birthday. And then our women that are incarcerated, that find themselves incarcerated currently as a contract, that's up for discussion, but it's currently a contract. And it is in the western side of our state, and they house minimum, medium, and maximum custody women at one facility. We are a small state, so the women, for example, there's about 150 usually on the docket, and that would include people that are in transitional facilities. So to give you an idea. Did that cover our questions?
Thanks. So one more, can you elaborate on peer classes?
Yeah, so peer classes is where we do assessments. We take a lot off the TABE and the TABE addendum. It gives us a lot of great information. And we look at where students are. And so if we have students that are needing pretty remedial work, let's say in math, for instance, and they're needing a lot of remediation work to even be close to being ready to be eligible to start the content of getting ready for the GED exam, that would be level 1. And then level 2 would be where they're coming out of the remediation, but now they need some practice and they're getting really close, right? They're starting to get up there in range. And I don't have that in front of me to tell you like grade level equivalency, so I'm sorry about that. I don't have that on these screens right now. And then level 3 would be, they're really close. They're going to pass, or they're likely to pass the GED Ready test. We're just fine-tuning some of the things that we're getting back in the assessments for them before they take the official test in there. So that would be the level 3.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. I will put this in presentation mode in just one moment. I'm actually going to drag, and if you'll just give me feedback that you're able to see this when I put it up here. So 2020 happened. Well, then what does that look like, right? So this is what that looks like. Tell me if you can see that once that turns bigger here.
You can see the thumbnail.
Okay, it's wanting to go to a different screen.
There we go.
Thank you. So this is Emma. She was the one I referred to earlier as my data diva. But this is her. 2020 happened, and some things had to change, right? And so we are now teaching from carts. We are virtual, we're synchronous, we're asynchronous, we're hybrid, we are face-to-face. It really just depends on what facility and what their status is. We might have a floor that's looking at quarantine, or a floor that has to stay in isolation. We might be looking at being down enough staff that we have to adjust what the teaching looks like. It's really pretty amazing how folks can be quite so so flexible. So this is for teaching. So I use this example because at the Youth Correctional Center, they've stayed face-to-face almost predominantly, and they're just in full PPE gear. And they've done that because the teachers have divided and conquered, where we have different buildings that the students sleep in, and they're called cottages. And so only a certain set of teachers are teaching that particular set of cottages now in the pandemic. So Hickory, for instance, is one of the names of the cottage. Then ex-teachers that are assigned to Hickory only teach Hickory to try to not cross-pollinate, because of course with our residents, both youth and adult, we're the biggest risk to them than they are to us, since we're the ones going outside the walls as we go. So I thought that that was kind of fun for you to be able to see, because it really is pretty wild what that looks like for us. In addition to our 2020 stuff, though, we had to really start to look at budgeting, because 2020 is taking a bite out of our budget. And so we are asked as an agency to look at a 15% cut, which is $34 million for us. And so with that, you know, we're really looking at what are the efficiencies and all those things, so that it doesn't equate to human resource or the least amount of human resource. You know, maybe hopefully positions that are open currently, and some of those types of things. So the reality check of that then was we went from a passing rate of 34% in 2010 to a passing rate of 84, 88, and 89% in the 16, 17, 17, 18, and 18, 90 school year, and higher than the national average. And that is to lots of different things, but I would equate it to being able to increase our technology so that we had the internet and wireless to add in more resources. I would equate it to the pure classrooms. I would equate it to the culture change of the infrastructure of having our agencies look like schools and our facilities look like schools. And I would most assuredly equate it to the teachers' stick-to-itness of wanting to see folks to the finish line, and really taking to assessments and figuring out where they're coming in at, to where we need to meet each of them with where they need to go. We had additional folks trained in the accommodation trainings so that they were able to do the WJ4 and the WACE 4, and they are able to administer it and do the grading, to where all that's left is for the psychologist to review it and give the opinion. And when we were able to do that, boy, did it speed us up, right? Because we're using our local psychologists, our clinical psychologists, and we have access to 4 of them. But if we could get it straight to them, just having to review, make their opinion, and write the official piece that was needed for the accommodations, we sped up our turnaround time significantly. I told you earlier that we went from 9 faculty and some volunteers in those 5 facilities to now we have 32 staff in the 4 facilities, I should say. There's 32 staff members. There's principals at each of the sites, at the Youth Correctional Center, the Penitentiary, and the Medium at James River Correctional Center. My deputy director in education serves as the principal over at Missouri River Correctional, and the head principal at the Youth Correctional. And then we have an assistant principal at the youth. So we have 25 FTEs and 7 full-time temps. At one point, the 9 faculty that we had before, 4 were FTEs and 5 were full-time temps. So we've increased our FTE count by 14 because some of the youth correctional now has transferred to the adult side. So we increased our FTE count from 2010 to today by 14 FTEs, and then we reduced our temps from 11 at one point to 7, because we were able to move some of those temps into FTE positions, which is always, of course, the wish, right? We went from students' length of stay, though, from 2.2 years in any facility in 2010 to 9.2 months as of current. And so that movement that I was talking about, that's how those peer classes really started to help with that leveling system. So it's really amazing to me, and it makes my heart happy, right? As I listen to the teachers send messages back and forth with, so-and-so is getting ready to transfer. You'll see them on next week, Tuesday. This is what they're working on. They're level 2, this, this, and this, right? And so really, it's increased some of the work to the teachers, but the students' transition has been pretty smooth. And then ultimately, you don't have to almost start over with intent, because sometimes poor intent follows the student when they transfer over if we're trying to play catch up. And so all of those things increased our efficiencies. The reading intervention program, our read write right now is only going about half the time because of the pandemic. But even with that, we're averaging 5.6 hours per grade level gained. When we were full time, which I ended that in February, we were averaging 4.4 hours per grade level gained. So 4.4 hours of tutoring in that reading program would gain them a level of reading. If they were reading at 6th grade, for instance, they would start to read at 7th grade in 4.5 hours of 4.4 hours of tutoring. The national average is 11.9 hours per grade level gained. All right, I'll make this one bigger, hopefully. Can you see that bigger now? Or can you see my notes?
I can see the notes version.
Yeah, it's not wanting to go to the other screen for some reason.
No problem.
All right, sorry about that, folks. Maybe that makes it a little bit better. So the portrait of a graduate. So what we did there is we actually created a bit of a roadmap for the GED roadmap and a profile of a lifelong learner. And what we did is it actually built a picture of what it was that we wanted to show the students as they came in. This is what they could expect, right? And so when we did that, it took a little bit less of the intent piece, because how we did this, I'll put this up here. This is a little bit bigger. How we did this was we went into policy, and our goal is really to have as many of the residents as possible being employed. And so if you did not have your GED or high school diploma through Century Code, we chose to interpret Century Code as an agency, that meant education was mandatory programming. In addition to that, then education became the only job they were eligible for until they successfully graduated. So there's a couple caveats there. I'll start with, what if they never can graduate? So we did have some of those. I'm pretty fussy. Any of my teachers would tell you that I'm maybe even nightmarish when I review those, because I want to be really fussy that if we're signing them out a Century Code, that we've exhausted all of the resources and instructional strategies we have at our fingertips. But beyond that, we've had folks, the very first person I exited was a gentleman that a teacher was working very hard at helping him become an excellent reader so that we could actually have him read appropriately to even try to begin studying for the GED test. And it became very clear to us about 2-3 months in, and we put some other referrals in, and he had some onset dementia where literally he was forgetting the phonetic things we were teaching him from week to week. So we created a formal exit process, and that exit process is something that we do a lot of stakeholder meetings with case managers. We work very closely with them, not only on progress of students and scheduling of students, but in this situation, like exiting students, where we talk very specifically with the case management on here's some of the hiccups that they've experienced along the way. Here's what the testing says. Here's what the accommodations testing says. Here's the progress that they've made. And we actually have the case manager write their opinion and approval on that exit form, as well as all the teachers that served them, that student, before the warden and I review for any of the facilities and sign off on it. The flip of that is we also give a roadmap to success, which I have in front of you. and that is giving them an idea of what it's going to look like on the journey of being in our education facility. So it gives them a kind of an idea, because sometimes when they learn that education is mandated and is the only employment they have, they might not be super excited about that right away, right? They're adults and they weren't successful in one area of their world, learning in school, clearly, or they would have already had their diploma or an equivalency. And so, you know, they're upset right away. And so if we give them a roadmap, they really have an idea that they can be a driver of their own bus, because we've explained to them then what they can expect. And they get it in orientation. And then they are explained along the way what we do within tape testing, the requirements of courses, what those courses break down to be, read, write, and then of course graduation. So that's what our roadmap looks like. Here's the portrait of a graduate. These are the attributes that we find really support our students to get successfully to the finish line. And so they persevere through difficult problems. It's really looking at building and growing their self-image, which I'm going to talk about in the second segment of this presentation today, but expressing a desire to be continue through education. And they can actually then visualize themselves having a successful and positive reentry into the community. In addition to that, we started to look at our numbers. Our programming numbers have increased just this year. Even with COVID, we've been able to implement Ashland University in the post-secondary, so we're very excited about that. Semester 1 is underway. The coordinators from Ashland that were hired through Ashland that are at our sites are on site, and we're very stoked at that opportunity. We are finalizing, and the equipment's been shipped, and within probably 30 to 45 days, we'll have the last mile up and going. And the last mile is a program that started at San Quentin that was cybersecurity, web design, and we are very excited that that's going to be a program that we offer at North Dakota State Penitentiary. So our programming is beyond just the mandatories that it takes to get to GED graduation, but we work very hard to give them vocational training within education as well, to include welding, construction ed. We have quite a few career and technical educators on staff, to include family and consumer science, career counseling, agriculture, vehicle and maintenance repair, auto tech, graphic type designs. So we're very excited about those opportunities. Recidivism rates nationally, according to the DOJ, says that DAS is 42% and DJS, so Division of Juvenile Services, is 37%. The recidivism rates in North Dakota combined is at 32%. And the recidivism rates for students who received a GED credential while in prison, I think, is pretty phenomenal to look at our facilities. The students with just the reading program, so just read write, had a recidivism rate of 31% of the youth and 19% on the adult side. Our students that got a GED or high school diploma with us before they left had a recidivism rate on the youth side of 14.1%, but on the adult side, 8.4%. And students with reading, GED, and a workforce training like Ashland or welding or something like that, the youth side was 9.2% and the adult side was 6.42%. So those were last year's numbers given to legislature. They are about 9.5 months old. So that's pretty phenomenal if you take a look at what the national averages are compared to, if you wonder about being in correctional education and making an impact on the journey, you certainly are. And that's beyond North Dakota at that point. It is all of you that serve at-risk populations. And so finally, as we began to empower the agency, we really had to start to work on enrichment. So we talked about the import theory and how we bring in people so that we have inside out working. For instance, I'm working on the Million Book Project with Dwayne Betts, who's an author of the book Felon, so that we have books that can come into our residents that inspire reading, that inspire growth and change, and that they can have with them as they leave. Import theory is we have professors at universities that come in and teach at night, and they have it be an audit class and or for credit depending on the situation that the student's in. We had an affirmation goal. We change our thinking. When we change our attitudes, we change our habits. And so we wanted to affirm things that were great attitudes that then were great habits for folks. And so our goal was 4-to-1 ratio of positive to negative reinforcement. And then we have supportive authority, and that is really the basis of all the things that we do within the North Dakota Department of Corrections. I often tell people to think of supportive authority as a 3-legged stool, and the 3-legged stool would be the first leg is absolutely you need to be firm, fair, and consistent without exception. And the second leg is that everyone is worth the effort. And the third leg is ultimately we have to respect that the choice is theirs. Now that doesn't mean that we have to respect their choice, but it does mean that we have to respect that we can only give them the absolute best things that we can give to them. Optimal environment of learning, optimal environment of change, and then ultimately then the choice is theirs. I want to end this segment of the 2 topics that they asked me to present on with a video. This video is something that was created by a lot of different colleagues within the Department of Corrections. And before I started, I just wanted to explain too that this video was part of that exchange. And so now we have a Warden's Exchange. We're working with the MEND, we're working with the Prison Fellowship Academy. We're working in lots of different areas to begin to increase the dignity and respect. So this video, sometimes the song is a little bit hard to understand, and that is because it is a song that was written and produced by some youth students at the Youth Correctional Center for their graduation a couple of years ago. So, you know, it's students that are singing. But I'm going to go ahead and show this video and then open it up to questions before we go on to the second topic.
On the road to glory, started with faith. I've proven to myself that I'm made for greatness. I have a hunger to succeed, so I'm steady pushing harder, and that's the resilience. This is the journey that we have to take. Be who you are, make the most out of every struggle. When you stumble in life, pick yourself up and be humble. Anyone can let obstacles bring them down, but overcoming them and making them your own is the real fight. It's like a weight that's been holding you down and being lifted for the first time. You gotta be in support of negatives in your life. You gotta stand there for what you know is right. Most things I do are passionate about. If I work hard, I'm gonna make it without a doubt. The courage is leaking beneath the surface. Everyone has a purpose. Welcome to constant circus. Everyone has a days when life brings them down. Turn over a new leaf, make a new sound. I'm motivated, my soul is shaking. This is my type of graduation. Work harder for what you desire. Play harder to show your fire. Living my life makes you a little tired. Gotta walk, crawl, stand through that fire. It's strictly calling, hoping for success. Trying to fit is passionate, never nothing less. Following good tradition from the start to the finish. You gotta know success is limitless. These hurdles ain't stopping me. Once I make it, there's no telling what I'll achieve. Running, jumping, winning the race. Hard things I'll give myself grace. Playing the game of life all the way to the finish line. Success is what I want to the end of my lifeline. Like my future, you know that I shine bright. Like my future, you know that I shine bright. On the road to glory, started with faith. Was passion and desire pushing us. Greatness is what all achieve.
All right. So that video is just a representation of a lot of the great work that's been done within the NDDOCR. And a lot of the pictures there actually come from education, which is why I love to be able to show it. The construction scenes are construction people. A lot of the pictures that had folks that kind of looked like teachers, right? There was a student of the year that was named Adult Lifelong Learner Student of the Year, which is our state GED association. There were several different pictures of classroom activities and experiments in the garden. And a lot of the service learning that happens, our educators are front and center when it comes to the coordination within those areas as well. So I like to end that piece with really the power of what our folks do. Do I have any other questions up there before we get to the mindfulness piece?
Yes, there were some questions. One question was, what do you use for your virtual learning delivery, like JPay, Lantern? They just gave a couple examples.
You increased my blood pressure. Just kidding. We do a little bit of everything. We have a corporate educational fully encrypted Zoom. And so our educators are able to use Zoom. In some cases, we use Teams. We do have Lantern. We have the Securus tablets. In some cases, depending on the complete lack of or whatever the situation is, we might even put a student on FaceTime and guided access where they can't navigate out of FaceTime. So we've really used a ton of different things, but predominantly we use Zoom and Teams and then the Lantern system.
Great. Okay. Now I understand why your blood pressure's up. It's a lot. There were a couple comments or questions just to ask if you'd be willing to share either your roadmap or the subheadings for your roadmap.
I would, so the only thing that gets really tricky for us to share is some of the policy pieces, but I've even been able to share those as well in certain cases. Some of the policies, because they link to other security things, then it's not for public review and they're protected. But I would be willing to share the technology policies, and any of those documents I put up. Those are ours. We built them. You can have them all.
Okay.
That's no problem. I do have. I shared the roadmap. I showed the profile of the lifelong learner. This is the youth side for anyone that might be listening. That's coming from a youth perspective. This is the one that they had created because it's different. We have some things that we wanted to be very similar. Marmot High School is our youth correctional center. Marmot School District was where the youth correctional center used to be. That school district has dissolved. And so the Department of Public Instruction, our Department of Ed here in North Dakota, allows us to award our high school diplomas as Marmot High School versus the Youth Correctional Center, just to be respectful that this might not be the journey they chose, but we got them there anyway. And so their GED comes from Marmot as well.
Great. And then there was a request to see if you would be willing to share the workbook for new teachers.
Yes, that we would be willing to share as well, no problem. One of the other things I would add, that's in a draft as far as like, I just reviewed it for like the second or third time, and the gentleman that's doing it has some really great content, still needs some grammar. So know that I'm an English heart by trade. And if I send it to you and you still see drafts, it's just in good faith that the English grammar issues of it will get fixed, I promise.
I don't think we'll hold it against you.
The other thing I should have mentioned that happened in 2019 that I'm really thankful for is we did an RFP project where we had people bid, and the person that won that bid, she did focus groups and research groups with people that were out on probation, people that were recidivist and had come back in, people that were in transition housing, you name it. And she wrote us our financial literacy workbooks. And she did a great job. The ones that she wrote for us, of course, are very North Dakota specific with some North Dakota resources involved. But she then what do I want to say, took some of the customization out of it that made it not North Dakota. And she did put those within a publishing system on Amazon. And so really the main cost, I already paid for everybody when she did it, you know, and of course the intellectual license was hers at that point. The copyright was hers per our contract. So those are available on Amazon. And so if anyone's really looking for workbooks, and she'd be willing to teach your teachers, what she did for us is she trained our teachers, and now our teachers train the curriculum that she wrote. And by design, I wanted her to write it in a way that it was a consumable workbook. And that was so important to me because I wanted that workbook to be theirs. They not only learned from it, but then it was theirs. They took it with them because there's something about that tangible that makes it a little bit more meaningful. So if anyone wants those things, I can supply that too. I would just need to know where I would send that stuff to.
Great. We'll coordinate that with you. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Are we good to move on?
I think so.
All right. So now what I want to talk about, when Melissa and I were talking, we talked a lot about, I'm a certified mental management coach, and I use this a lot within work. I don't usually tell them that I'm doing mental management. And so I'll be curious, as I think some of my own faculty are on and listening today, when they respond back to me with "you didn't," because there's a lot of things that we do within our leadership that is strongly based on mental management. I also coach the mental game within sports. So I work with archers, I work with shooters, golfers, gymnasts. New to me was a karate person, and I do quite a bit of leadership. I'm currently mentoring 9 of our executives within the Department of Corrections. And so I wanted to share some of this because some of this is also what helped us with our infrastructure. And I think is just good content for people looking to, or people that are in search of their best selves, not only in professional life, but personal life. So the first thing I just want to talk about is, you know, how'd we do, or how are you? The first thing we usually say is what? I'm fine. It was okay, right? And if we pry much more than that, usually people will talk about everything that went poorly within whatever they were doing or an activity or how they're feeling. And so what I want to share with you today is this curriculum was all written and is copywritten by Lanny Basham, who is a silver and gold medalist, USA medalist. And I'm licensed as a certified level 3 instructor. There's 8 of us in the US. And this conscious mind, subconscious, and self-image, this is our mind triad. And no matter what we're doing, it doesn't matter if we're in sport, if we're in leadership, if we're in education, if we're in parenting, whatever the case is, we have to strive to have a balanced mind triad of our conscious mind, our subconscious mind, and our self-image. So what does that mean? Our conscious mind is our thoughts. I often tell people to think of this as our GoPro, right? Our conscious mind is thinking about what we're thinking about, what's about to happen, what's going to happen. The problem is our conscious mind is programmed to protect us. When we walk out of Walmart at 9:30 at night and it's dark, what does our conscious mind tell us? Look both ways before you cross the street, look this way, look that way. Am I being followed? Am I this? Am I that? Right? Our conscious mind can sometimes be a bully. So even though we are subject matter experts, and in this case, we'll talk as education as the hat that I'm going to use as the examples, we're the subject matter expert, we know how to teach something, and something might have felt off. A student's reaction, a colleague in the room, whatever the case may be, somebody else's comment to us ahead of coming into this class, and we can't let it go. And our conscious mind, our current thoughts can really make an impact on what we do, because our conscious mind sends signals both to our self-image and to our subconscious. So our subconscious is what we know how to do. We know how to tie our shoes. If I asked you to walk across the room and back to me, you can do that because the subconscious can do multiple things at once, unlike the conscious mind that can think about one thing at once. Our subconscious literally does all kinds of things. So if you walked across that room and back to me, You aren't saying left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. You're not saying heartbeat. You're not saying breathe now. You're not saying blink now. You're just doing it. That's what we know how to do. The problem is a lot of times we don't ever perform fully in everything we know how to do because our mind gets in the way. Our conscious mind gets in the way. One of the things that I'll tell people that I'm working with and I mentor and coach is we spend a lot of times in our head. So we need to make sure that it's a pretty nice place to live. We need to clean out the things that are self-doubt and the bully piece of our conscious mind. This gets built by training. Our conscious mind to our self-image gets built by what we call imprinting. And imprinting is simply the words that cause us to imagine and feel things creates an image, and our self-image becomes a repository. It's like a big bucket, right, of all the images that it causes us to do. Our self-image is what it's like us to do. So let me give you an example. If I used education as an example, and I'm a 30-year educator, so now if I went and I was to teach an English class, I would feel pretty confident, right? So I would say that my conscious, subconscious, and self-image is pretty balanced. But sometimes what happens is when we're learning something new, our conscious mind's large and our subconscious and self-image are pretty small. And or we're super frustrated. And if we're super frustrated about something, our conscious mind and our subconscious mind are pretty big, but our self-image is small because they're doing a tug of war back and forth between I wonders, I wishes, I don't knows, I woulda, coulda, shouldas, and what I know how to do. And our self-image is like, oh man, this is going to be bad, right? So our self-image is what it's like us to do, and we have to make sure that we are growing and protecting our self-image at all times. So let me give you an example.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yeah.
All right, so I'm going to stop it there for a second. So the reason I share that video is because I feel like everyone that is here today could relate to that, right? The little bit of road rage or upset that somebody wasn't looking or was really dangerous to us. But the biggest thing that we have to remember within our self-image is that we have to know that the way we respond to something gives us an image, and that goes to our self-image. Our brain is networked to protect us, and our brain also does not know the difference between fact or fiction. We are 100% survivors of all things that have happened to us because they've happened for us and not to us. Let me tell you what I mean there. So that car got in front of the hedgehog, right? We're saying that we don't want to be hedgehogs. That car got in front of the hedgehog, and the hedgehog chose to respond negatively with anger. Now I say chose because you say, oh, I just woke up on the wrong side of the bed today. Nope, that's a choice. Everything that we choose makes us feel a certain way. Our self-image is very self-centered. It already has an idea of what we can and cannot do. Let me give you an example. If I had a 4-inch I-beam of metal and it was 20 feet long and I had it on the ground and I said, You walk across that I-beam without touching a toe to the ground, and I will give you $100. If we were in an actual meeting room and I said, show of hands of who would walk across that I-beam for $100, I would guess that a majority, if not 100% of the participants in the room would say, absolutely, I could use $100. Why? Because even if you've never walked across an I-beam before, our self-image has a belief system about whether or not we can do it. And we're like, yes, the risk is less, so we can. That's what's really important about believing in ourselves. Correctional education and education as a whole is a complete moving target. And we have to believe that what we're doing with all the decisions that we make, that some of them are going to be incorrect. But if we're not making mistakes, we're not making decisions. And the only time we truly lose, the only time we truly fail, is if we do not learn from the decisions that we make. We win or we learn. The only time that we officially lose is when we're not disciplined enough to learn. So the hedgehog has to learn and or think about what other situations could be right in that scenario. Maybe the person that cut them off is en route to the hospital with somebody or meeting somebody and is super late, or their child just called hurt on the playground and they're super concerned, right? There's all kinds of scenarios. Always, when our emotions start to get the best of us, our conscious mind will want to give us the worst case scenario. So keep this in mind. 90% of all worry does not come true. And the 10% of worry that does come true never comes true in the degree of catastrophic thinking that we already put worry in. So we need to make sure that we believe in ourselves. I want to show a second video to illustrate this. We also have to make sure that we are aware of who's with us and how they help us. All right, I showed that for a couple different reasons. One, the person, his support person, increased his self-image by giving him whatever pep talk he gave that little guy before he did his final jump. But did you also see that he took a moment? He reset himself. He thought about what it was that he was working on. Anytime we're going to work on something in a mindful, mentally mastered way, we see ourselves, we remember what it is we're working on, and we see it excellently done in our heads. We see ourselves being excellent in it, and then we commit. So you saw that little guy put his hands up, he thought about it, he even did a physical rehearsal of his hands, and then he did it. When he finally made the mark, when he finally got onto the stool, what did he do? Yeah, right? It was awesome. Here's what we do. As educators, we don't toot our own horns. However, internally, we need to make some time to really think about all the things that we've gotten accomplished. Where did we start? We always will advocate for our students. We will always say, oh, but when he joined me, and we tell a whole story. We also have to forgive ourselves and be our biggest cheerleaders. Yeah, when we accomplish things that are really awesome. Now, I know that we don't always want to do those things out loud. And of course, if we always do them out loud, you're not going to have anyone left to listen to you, right? But you have to make sure that you are feeding and growing your self-image, because our work is hard and you all do great work. And so it's really important that, like that little guy, when he finally made it up on the stool, we say, yes, all of that was worth it. That felt great, before we let it go. So oftentimes we get an award, we get an affirmation, we get Employee of the Quarter, we get a certificate, and we're like, okay, and then we move straight on. We don't take a moment to savor that moment. And it's all of those moments that are accomplishments. And if we don't take a minute just to think about our accomplishments, they fade from us as fast as they fade from everyone else. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Accomplishments are temporary. Accomplishments in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, you're never going to remember who won a certain award, right? I was very fortunate enough to win the 2019 Sodbusters Award from our governor in North Dakota. Well, this year there's a new one already named, right? Very fitting person. So in 2 years, no one's going to remember that it's me besides myself, because I experienced it, my family, and of course my mother. But my point is, that is accomplishment, and accomplishment is temporary. But what that little guy learned in lessons, that is who he's becoming. He never gave up. He took direction. He was coachable. He was determined. And who we become, people, who we become is permanent. So it's all in how we choose to see things. This is not a very good picture. And so let me see if I can make it bigger. But this picture, I like to illustrate because it tells us what we're looking for. Can you tell me can you see it, or is it too gray?
Sorry, couldn't get off mute. I can see it. It's a little gray, but I can see it.
So since this isn't very interactive, let me tell you what this picture, and I'm willing to share this picture. This picture was based on a home study. And this family had been going sofa surfing and not in any kind of a stable home for several months. And they were put in a low income furnished home. And so this is a sketch of an actual photograph. And what I ask people to do when I say that is I ask them to make some observations about the picture. Since you can't see this well, and I'm willing to share this slide for sure if people want it to be able to look at it later. A lot of times what people will say is, ooh, there's an iron, ooh, there's a knife. Well, there's a lady here on the phone drinking a pop, but this kid looks dead and this kid's upset, right? Because I already framed it as a home study. And then I asked them to flip the script and think about, okay, so what I see is clean clothes because there's an iron plugged in. I see that this little guy has a Band-Aid, so they must be doing all right that way. I see there's kid appropriate TV on the TV, and that they're doing well enough that the TV and the phone still have services. And I see that they have food because of, and I also see that the mom's home and the mom and dad had shift work at the same time, so they must have gotten that figured out, right? And the reason that I do that is because it starts to really flip the script for our thinking, and it tells us what it is that we choose to do. If I buy a red car, pretty soon I see 2,500 red cars on the road because we've piqued that interest. If we're truly going to have our mind balance, if we're truly going to go to this goal right here of keeping a conscious mind, subconscious, and self-image being about the same image, we need to control what it is we're looking for. If we think that our cups are half full and leaking, then we're right. If we think somebody's out to get us, then we're right. Here's what I mean. Even if somebody is not out to get us, we still will be able to manage to see little artifacts that will make our brain continue to believe that. I'll give you an example. I am 47 years old. I grew up in South Dakota, West River. My mom was deathly afraid of snakes, and we grew up in rattlesnake country. So I was taught, right? My conscious mind believes that any tall grass has a big live rattlesnake that's ready to eat me up, for real. And so even today, as I live in North Dakota now, not in rattlesnake country, I might see a big massive bull snake, but he's less than interested in eating me. When I'm in tall grass, I will notice that my body will tense up and my heart will begin to pump a little bit faster because I still believe, my conscious mind still bullies me that rattlesnakes are evil, right? Rattlesnakes are evil, they're going to eat me up. So it's the same thing within any of the things that we want, that we think about. We have to make sure that we are thinking in a very specific way. To build our self-image and protect it, we have to remember that the way we do that is by what we do, who we are around, what we think about, talk about, and write about. Those things create images, and those images build or shrink our self-image. And when we build or shrink our self-image, here's the salty part of that. It is the last image that our brain thinks about before the next thing we're about to do. And so the next thing we're about to do will act on the last fact. Do we want the last fact to be that those people were talking about us versus that those people are collaborating? Absolutely not. We want to make sure that we protect our self-image. What is out of our hands deserves to be freedom from our minds too. Why are we worrying? 90% of worry does not come true, and the 10% that does is never at a catastrophic rate in which we imagine it. So we have to let those things go. If we fail, if we make a mistake, we learn from it, and then it's a win, and we let it go because we're better prepared for what we're about to do next. I want to show one more video. Actually, I'm going to show two more videos, but this one's really quick.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13.
Now I'm going to stop it there for a second. Many of you probably watching were successfully able to count 13. Here's how this relates to self-image and our conscious mind's communication to our self-image. We can have hyper-focus on something. Let's make sure that it's a hyper-focus on something that's very valuable to us. But let's also make sure that we don't miss all the other things around us because we think that the only thing we need to work on is this right here, right? So watch this.
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
So the moonwalking bear even pauses, right? The moonwalking bear actually even poses for the camera. Many of you would not have seen the moonwalking bear because I had already set it up that you needed to count how many passes we're doing. So as we're teaching, we get so hepped up in getting them to the finish line of the diploma, getting them to the finish line of the standard, getting them to the finish line of a grade level improvement, all, you know, the educational functioning level improvements, all of these different things. But let's not forget that we need to stop and take a look at the check-in. Check-ins are powerful. Check-ins are ways that we're able to do these things. And the last thing is, to protect and grow our self-image, we have to make sure that what we do is for the right reasons. That grows our self-image. Who we're around are helpful to us. If they cause us bad imagery excessively, we might need to take a look at why that is. I have a colleague that often slimes me, which means when we get together, she's often talking very negatively about work and all those things. But otherwise, I really value being around her. So now periodically we'll do coffee and I have a ground rule. No shop talk. I just want to catch up with you. Now I have an opportunity to really enjoy my colleague as a friend, but not get slimed. That's what's really important. And then finally, what we think about, talk about, and write about. If we compliment others, we increase our self-image. If we judge or criticize or rumor about others, we shrink our self-image. If we believe in what we do and we visualize what that's going to look like when it's great, we become a grown and protected self-image. It is the smallest mind triad of almost every human. 97% of us have the smallest of the three mind triads, if they're not balanced, is our self-image. We have to make sure that we're protecting it. We have to make sure that we're growing it. And the reason for that is we absolutely have to make sure that we are doing the right things for the right purposes. You're forming educators that are forming students into a victory line. So that is what's super important. As I look at time here, the rest of this was just some repeat to make a little bit more sense. But I'm going to stop there, I feel, so that we can finish out with whatever questions have piled up.
All right, so we have a few questions mostly related to the first section. And so one question was, what kind of tablets do your students use?
We use iPads and we use Securus JPay tablets.
Okay. And then the next one was, I'm not sure you'll have this one off the cuff, but it says, what's the average sentence of your students?
The youth side, the average length of stay is 102 days. And on the adult side right now, it's 3.1 years, but I look for that to be very different, right? With this, I mean, 2020 numbers are just gonna straight up be weird.
Yeah, definitely. And then someone had asked what curriculum or materials you utilize mostly in instruction.
Oh, good heavens, that's a big discussion. Like, I would be happy to share everything we use, but that might be where they actually want to, what subjects and for what purposes, right?
Yep. And that's what I've heard from many correction DOCs is they use a multitude of resources and just depends on the content area. So yeah. Let's see. Someone said they heard that you were doing work with another state. Can you tell us about what things you do with other states and DOCs?
I'm not sure what they're referring to there. We do share a lot of resources. We do some specific trainings. We share like our mentoring and some of those things with other states. We have a lot of collaborative agreements with training. In education specifically, there's been a few states that just kind of want to have a discussion on policy, our curriculum, how we put our infrastructure in place, but we don't have any like MOUs of contracted services at all, just
Okay.
helping neighbors.
Let's see. There's a question on what reentry services you provide.
Reentry services is actually a four-legged goal that our agency had put as a priority goal, and then COVID happened. So we started in groups in 2019 and really started to work on things because the goal is exit upon entry, and we're not there yet, to be honest. I mean, our pie in the sky is as they're getting closer, like at that five-month mark, that they're already starting to make their contacts and have some visits and shadows outside of the walls so that they're ready. We've had a few of those victory stories. I can think of a youth student that was of age 2. He had turned 18 at the youth correctional. Actually, he had turned 19 there and had went through the welding program and such. And we were able to have him have his job interview via Skype and have his equipment and his clothing and things so that when he discharged, he actually already had a job in place, and that would truly be exit upon entry. What we currently have is we have triage meetings where case managers and the residents themselves and educators, treatment, all of those people that are involved work with the resident. There's work release and other opportunities there. We have vocational services, and they will have opportunities to do we have partners with Voc Rehab and Job Service North Dakota, where they already have some of those linkages. Excuse me.
It's a lot of talking, right?
But always a goal to build that. I think that should be all of our goals for sure.
All right, we have one on the new TABE. How has it impacted your processes?
Well, I would say resilience, right? We actually did the pilot too, so we had a taste of it ahead of it. We're still doing some fine tuning with some of our existing curriculum there. With the old TABE, we had it kind of figured out like exactly what they would need to score to go here or there, and now we're getting there with this one, and we have way less hiccups. So I'm pretty pleased at this point for sure.
Great. And I have two questions that are related. So one is basically their superiors are completely against any kind of online education or instruction. and access. So the question, the first part really was about that. Are there any tips or advice that you can give to help them with that? And then the second piece of it is, how do you prevent students, once they have access, from communicating outside the prison?
Yeah, okay, both great questions. So I've been in corrections for 17 years now, and on the youth correctional side, that's where I started. We always had the internet with our students, and so there I never had the win of getting it. On the adult side, we got it in 2012. So how did we do it? I really recommend that you're upfront, and if you have a big change that can kind of help with the like we use computer-based testing of GED 2014, right? But we started that because we knew that 2014 was happening in 2012. So I wrote a policy because that was one of the things that was going to have to happen. And I reached out to my colleagues across the nation. What I learned was, man sakes, there weren't many of us that had internet or had that opportunity. So I took a little bit from here and there. I took the examples of our employee policies for technology, and I did a policy first. Not a policy that was official, just a policy that would at least give them a picture about what I was asking for. And in that policy, we had acceptable use policies, not only for our students, but also for our teachers, putting the capabilities of that in the hands of the students, because it's a big responsibility and it's a big, of course, risk as well. And so I would really recommend that. And then just for comical relief, I will tell you that we took those things, we met in a conference room. I had two teachers help present it because they helped do all the work. And so I felt like they should have the floor and the mic, and they presented it. The one chief of security was probably the age of my grandfather. He was not going to vote yes, probably. And so we handed him that iPad and guided access to explain how secure that was. And he kept hitting that screen. Like, the harder he hit that iPad touchable screen, that was how he was going to break into getting to other places. We also have, so that's comical, but I mean, you have to start with all the people that are going to want to be averse to risk. So your chief of securities, your wardens, your deputy wardens. I was very, very fortunate that during this time, I had a director that was super pro education. So she was already on board. And so that certainly helped too, to be able to explain the savings that you have, the innovations you can do, the efficiencies that you can have are really important. How do we keep them safe? Well, we have a firewall. We have a encrypted value that looks for searches. We have an intranet for our residents for most of the things that they do. And then we have a live outside internet for things that we can very much protect through guided access. And there's nothing that will do better than proximity of that teacher by what we have there. We also have applications in place where we can put all of the teachers or all of the students' screens on the big projector in front of the room too, the interactive projector. So you're able to see what everyone's doing at any given time.
Great, very helpful. Okay, with that, I think we'll hand it back over to Melissa and close this out. Thank you so much, Dr. Penny, for all your time and effort to do this. We really appreciate it.
Sure, and thanks for helping me along with what you're seeing and not seeing.
Yes, thank you, Penny. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. We appreciate you sharing and explaining how your state overhauled your focus of education and practices. Your presentation was extremely informative and provided attendees with many excellent ideas of how they can go about creating positive changes in their programs and the importance of a balanced mindset. And DOCR is lucky to have you leading the charge. Thank you also to our Corrections Forum members, the Directors of Education for state DOCs, for all of your hard work and guidance during this pandemic. And thank you to our attendees. Again, we will make the recording of today's session and some of the documents Penny showed, as well as yesterday's recording, available to you and those that could not make today's session on our website next week. please make sure you've copied the link that was posted earlier in this presentation so you can easily access the recordings and certificates next week. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and take care.
Thank you.